welcome into a special episode of Court Time with Crina Mustafa. I'm Crina Mustafa, and today I'm joined by Vivek Jacob. He's a writer for the Raptors. He does tennis at CBC Sports, soccer as well, various places. He just covered the World Cup, which was absolutely fantastic. You guys will notice we're in a different room today. We got some construction going on in our other studio, so we're in the podcast room today, which is nice because
It's a nice setup.
Yeah, it'll be more conversational, and I'll try to stop swiveling in my chair. But we are going to get into Australian Open semifinals, which they are at very late times or early times, depending on the way that you look at it. So we will start with the earliest one, the women's side. This is very interesting because I think at the beginning of the tournament, if you looked at the draw, maybe you wouldn't have predicted that all these players would have made it this far, except for maybe Sabalenka. You could have argued that she could have made it to the semis. But We'll start with the first matchup. Rybakina, Azarenka. This is kind of cool. You have the 2022 Wimbledon champ versus the former Australian Open champ who actually won here 10 years ago now. So she's kind of in top form again. I'm curious, what are your thoughts on this matchup?
I'm super excited for it. I think you've got two players playing at the top of their game. I mean, when you watched Azarenka against Pegula, I was like, man, her level is incredible. Like the depth she was getting on her, both like her backhands and forehands, and especially her backhand. I mean, that just put so much pressure on Pegula. And I don't think she really had much of a plan B. But I think Azarenka's form, then you look at Rybakina, like everything seems under control. And I think when you look at why that is, it seems like she's hitting, like she's on top of the ball almost every time. It's very rare. Like here and there, you'll see, you know, that she has to crouch to get to the backhands, you know, just outstretched, whatever it is. But for the most part, she's on top of the ball. She's moving so well, anticipating so well, serving so well. So I think I would give the edge to Rybakina, but I'm excited for this matchup.
Yeah, it's funny because I had Pegula to win the whole thing at the start of the tournament, and I was like, it's going so well. And I thought that she would be able to get past Azarenka. I thought that maybe it would have taken 3 sets for her just because of the form that she's in. But then I saw that it was like, oh, straight sets. Well, that's not entirely great for my pick. And I think even in this matchup, I would tend to agree with you. I think I would lean towards Rybakina. But there's a part of me that doesn't want to count Azarenka out. I feel like if she just plays lights out tennis, then she has a very good chance of making it to the final. So this is one of my favorite. I'm definitely gonna have to set an alarm for 3:30 a.m. because you can't miss this. And then moving on to the other two, who I know there's like a lot of jokes. You're like, ha ha ha, somebody Polish in the semifinals. It's not Iga Swiatek. So funny. I swear I've seen that joke like 10 times on my timeline by now. But Magda Linette is in the semifinals. I mean, what an impressive run for her. She's defeated 4 seeds, and that included Anett Kontaveit, Alexandrova, Caroline Garcia, and then just yesterday, Karolina Pliskova, which was absolutely, I mean, at that rate, I was like, yeah, she's definitely going to beat Pliskova with the way that she's playing. But what have your thoughts been on her run up until now?
I think her defense has been excellent. I think she's able to absorb pressure a lot, which is something you have to do against Pliskova. And I think she did that really well. And then, you know, when Pliskova would think she's in these aggressive positions where she can take control of the point, that's when Linette is able to hit that neutral ball, settle it down, then put herself in a winning position. Or, you know, there were times flat out where she's on the run and just blasting winners by her, right? And so I think that's been really impressive. I think what I'm curious to see going up against Sabalenka is, you know, Sabalenka can kind of just take the racket out of your hand, right? And so how often can Sabalenka, you know, just dictate right off the top and finish points early? You know, maybe within those first 5-6 shots, I think that's going to be decisive. And so I kind of lean Sabalenka, but what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think I'm pretty confident in Sabalenka, and I also noticed because she hasn't dropped a set all tournament long, which I think is super important for her. Because the serving has been kind of inconsistent in the last year or so, and I think that's something that she's really been working on. And I feel like if she gets her serve under control, then the rest is just easy for her. She's able to be like her powerful style of tennis that she likes to play against her opponents. And I would give the edge to her. She is the highest seed left in the draw. I am pretty confident that she would beat Lynette just because her level is constantly improving with each match. But again, it's one of those things where you're like, you don't want to count out the other player. It feels like there could be an upset. But yeah, I know. That's why I don't like predictions, guys. I think I went 2 of 4 in the quarterfinals. So I know it started off really bad because I said Ostapenko was going to beat Rybakina.
Yeah.
That didn't happen, and then it was not looking good. But
it's funny how so much of this is about matchups too, because like I think if Azarenka were to play Sabalenka, I might actually like Azarenka's chances. And I think Magda Lynette might even have a better chance against Rybakina. But I think because it's switched now, I go the other way. I genuinely think that we'll get a Rybakina Sabalenka final, which would be incredible.
It's true. And like speaking of matchups, you saw that with Pegula as well. I think not to like bring her back into the conversation because she was my pick, but it just felt like I think Azarenka even talked about it in her post match where she mentioned that Pegula has kind of a simple style of game, and I think she was just able to figure it out. And not simple in a bad way. It's just really, and I've talked about this with Pegula before. It just has like a winning formula. Like she has kind of the same style of tennis that she always plays that isn't really as flashy as other players are. And so it's been very successful this year and last year. But I think, Azarenka was able to figure that out, and it was all the matchup because I feel like maybe Pegula would have made it to the semis if she ran into anybody else. But yeah, it is interesting to see. We're going to ruin our sleep schedules for the women's matchups, but it's very exciting because only 2 people here have won a slam before, and one of them is going to be eliminated after the semi. So you might potentially have somebody winning their first Grand Slam in the final. So we'll see that if that happens. But moving on to the men, because I know your fave is still in the draw, Mr. Novak Djokovic. But before that, I want to talk about Khachanov and Tsitsipas because these 2 players, I feel like they're kind of in the mix of the next generation. They have beaten top players before. I think even Tsitsipas even more being the 3rd seed, having the experience of being in a slam final before, which Novak conveniently forgot the other day. He was like, I don't think Tsitsipas has been in a final before. He's like, and the reporter was like, oh, you beat him at Roland Garros.
Yeah, from 2 sets down.
Like, Novak, I know you played a lot of finals, but come on, man. But yeah, like in this match, would you favor Tsitsipas? Because I know Khachanov's had some really solid wins to get here.
Honestly, I think this is kind of a pick'em because I think Khachanov is playing that well. I remember looking at the draw at the beginning and thinking I didn't feel too great about Rafa's chances. I didn't feel great about Tiafoe. And so I was like, maybe Khachanov is the one that comes out here. And he has, and I think he's played excellent tennis. I think obviously he's also had like a favorable draw. The matchups have worked out. And obviously the injury to Korda was unfortunate for Korda, but that was very competitive early on. And then once the injury happened, it was just difficult. So I think this is going to be a really good test for both. And with Tsitsipas as well, ideally you would have thought he would have been playing, Felix or Medvedev at one of these junctures, and it didn't happen, right? When you look at the draw, those are the matchups that you're envisioning. Yeah. It just didn't happen. And so I think this is like a first real big test for both of them. I will have to lean Tsitsipas just because of Khachanov's record against top 10 players. He hasn't beaten one, I think, since, 2019? So that makes me definitely go with Tsitsipas.
Yeah, to be honest, and I know, like you said, like you were worried about Tiafoe. I honestly thought Tiafoe could beat Khachanov, and then I was like, oh, that didn't happen. The prediction side is not very good for me this tournament. It's been okay, but yeah, I think I would agree with you, lean Tsitsipas. I think at this point it's just Djokovic against the field, so whoever makes the final, good luck. But moving on to Djokovic's matchup against Tommy Paul, who, this tournament was full of Americans, especially American men doing really well, like in the previous
for
matchup.
A change.
Yeah, for a change. We're looking at you guys, American men. Come on, for a change. But Tommy Paul versus Ben Shelton, like that that was just amazing to see 2 American men going up. Honestly, if there was going to be American men this late, I would have thought it would be like Taylor Fritz or,
Tiafoe.
like Tiafoe, like I mentioned before. But it's nice to see that there is kind of so many guys now that are playing more consistent tennis. And the Shelton story was funny because it was his first time leaving the States ever in his life. And to make it to the quarters of a Grand Slam and your first time leaving the country is pretty impressive. But Tommy Paul, I feel like, was just kind of playing better tennis throughout these couple weeks. I think Shelton maybe had I don't want to say easier matchups, but just a little bit better than Tommy Paul. And I think he's playing a great level of tennis. I think he's going to make this one a fight against Novak. But what are your thoughts?
I think the way Novak is looking now, my main concern with Novak was the hamstring injury. I think, watching his second round match, then watching him in the third round against Dimitrov, it just seemed like the hamstring was getting worse. And so with that being the case, I was like, the players further down the line should be pushing him even harder and making life that much more difficult for the hamstring. And so whatever he's been doing in between the matches to heal up is obviously working wonders. Like personally, I think maybe there's some personal bias here because I've had everything from like a minor, hamstring pull to a grade 3 hamstring tear.
Oh, wow.
And so that's why I was like, I don't see how this changes. But it has changed. And obviously he has access to resources that I can only dream of. And that obviously plays a big part.
Just a little.
And yeah, the way he's looking now physically, like probably the only thing you'd say is missing is some of the open stance backhands, some of the, the sliding backhands. But, the level he's at, he seems to be okay without it.
Yeah, I think he's only dropped 1 set so far, if I'm not mistaken. So do you think Tommy Paul could at least take 1 set off of him?
I don't think so. I just think Novak at Rod Laver Arena, like this is, I was actually looking at the records of Rafa at the French Open, since 2011 and Novak in Australia since 2011. Because that 2011 is when things really started clicking for Novak. And they're pretty similar. Like, obviously, Rafa has more history, and so that's why the Roland Garros record is what it is. But if you were to look strictly from 2011, Novak is something like 65-3. And, like, 2 of those losses, one was to, Chung when he had the shoulder problem. And then the year later, he wasn't 100% either, right? So 2 of those losses, he was, like, physically incapable of being who he usually is. So really you're looking at 1 loss to Stan Wawrinka.
Stan the man, guys. Shout out Stan. I mean,
he is the man. And so that's why when you look at that history, him moving like this, unless there is, a regression with the hamstring, I can't see anyone stopping him now.
Yeah, that's totally fair. I mean, honestly, it's taken other things to stop him in Australia, but none of them have to do with his game. So yeah, you are. I think you're going to be completely right on that end, and you've obviously had more success with your picks than I have. But yeah, it's going to be fun. Do you have a matchup that's your favorite, and you can't choose Novak?
A matchup that's my favorite.
Yeah.
I think I'll go with that women's final potentially of Rybakina and Sabalenka. Like if those 2 were to play, I think that would be a tremendous final.
Yeah.
And so that is what I would hope for. If not, I think Sabalenka facing off against Azarenka would be pretty good too.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I think that's the matchup I'm most excited for. We'll see if, Novak, forgetting that he's played Tsitsipas in a final, gives Tsitsipas a little extra to be like, oh, you forgot that we played in a final.
Him.
Yeah. We'll see. We'll see if any of that happens. But I think the matchup, definitely on the women's side, I lean more towards that. What about you?
Yeah, I definitely agree. I mean, not to be biased or anything, but I enjoy the women more than the men sometimes. So yeah, I would really enjoy 2 hard-hitting players from the baseline in Rybakina and Sabalenka. Also, I've said Rybakina's name wrong like 5 times already. Rybakina, Rybakina. I know it's like how to pronounce
it took me a while to figure. I'm like, some comment like at the beginning, like commentators would say it differently, and then I usually try to listen into what the umpire is saying, because usually they do a good job of like
Well, here's the
making sure
thing.
they say it right.
The WTA website has her saying her name, but it's like it isn't really the same as how anybody is saying it, and then like it's hard to just kind of like replicate her own accent with it. But yeah, like there is a recording of her saying her own name, so I don't know why this is so hard. But we wish all the best luck to her, of course. And tell people where they can find you, anything you're working on that you want to promote.
Yeah, the usual stuff at Raptors.com covering the Toronto Raptors, and then besides that, CBC Sports. And besides that, you can just follow me on Twitter at Vivek Jacob and find all the links to my work there.
Definitely. I know you're one of my favorite tennis accounts to follow on my timeline. So definitely follow him, check him out. I'll have all his information in the description below. Thank you so much for joining me today on Court Time.
Thanks so much for having me, Crina.
And stay tuned because we'll have another episode next week.